Howdy y'all, welcome back to Vicker Studios, and today I'm going to show you how to make your KATO Unitrack go from looking like this to this in just a few simple steps. Unitrack is one of the best types of track available for model railroading because of its rugged reliability, modularity, and plug-and-play wiring system that quickly gets my trains up and running smoothly. I want to spend my hobby time focusing on my trains, not fussing around with the track, and Unitrack lets me do just that. It just needs a bit of paintwork to make it more realistic looking. Here's how I painted mine. I started by painting the rails and ties with a mix of Tamiya XF10 flat brown and XF84 dark iron. You can adjust the ratios to make colors representing older or newer rails, respectively, and I went with a 50-50 mix to represent an average level of wear and tear. For convenience, I combined my paints straight in the pot. I chose Tamiya acrylics because they're thick, and we need that viscosity for getting our paint to adhere to the unprimed metal rails. My father and I used Vallejo air paint from an airbrush on his layout, and that paint took many layers to achieve full coverage, while Tamiya only needs one or two. I apply my paint mix over the rails and ties, doing my best to keep it from getting on the ballast by skipping the brush over the ties. It's okay if we have some mess, as this can be either removed with some thinner or incorporated in the following weather phases. Remember, ballast is very rarely scrubbed clean on the prototype, so some splotches are acceptable. However, I recommend that you avoid painting the rail ends and Unitrack connectors for now to maintain conductivity between tracks. I find it is better to paint them after assembly, rather than paint now and have to clean them later. Paint will inevitably get on the railhead during this process. We can either wipe this off with a wet Q-tip right away, or wait for it to dry and scrub it off with a trackpad cleaner. I started with a Q-tip as it takes the paint right off, but found it tended to also remove some of the paint on the sides of the rail that then had to be repainted, so I switched to using the trackpad for the most part. With how repetitive this task can be, I'll take any time savings I can. Once I finished my first coat of paint, I then came back and applied a second coat to any spots where the bare metal was still showing through. Scrub, 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 and we're ready for the next step. I chose to paint some of my ties a different color to add variety. I went in with shades of brown to represent ties that have aged differently from others, such as newer replacement ties. I tried to avoid painting the rail plates as I do so. This is entirely optional, but I like the realism that this granularity provides. I finished it off with a dry brush of a light sand color to catch some of the raised wood details. Scrub the rails again, and we're halfway done. It was then the ballast's turn for paint. The KATO roadbed has good definition to catch a wash, so I applied a burnt umber oil wash over the entire piece. I followed this up with some spot applications of black oil paint to represent oil leakages and grime accumulation. These spots are my favorite part of the process. I then set the tracks aside for a couple of days until the oils were dry to the touch. I cleaned the railheads again and assembled the track to run a quick test to make sure the track was conducting the electricity properly. It is better to identify any problem spots now before going any further. If there's any issues, clean off the paint with some acetone until conductivity is restored. I then moved on to touching up any missing paint. I painted over the exposed rails connecting tracks, painted ties onto the Unitrack clips, and touched up the wash. I used some gray wash to tone down the clip's light gray plastic. One more clean and I was ready for final testing. I started with a diesel locomotive as they have superior electrical pickup than steam locomotives. Once it passed without a single glitch, I moved on to my steamers. I set my locomotives to 1% speed and let them go back and forth across every route. My Broadway Limited sound-equipped Light Pacific has its volume set to loud by default, and I found this handy for testing. I started the engine, turned the sound down, and kept going with my other tasks. If I heard the sound switch back to being loud, then I knew the locomotive encountered an electrical issue and had restarted. Any such trouble spots were then scrubbed and retested until acceptable. And there we have it. We've gone from toy train looking pieces of track to a highly detailed and weathered railroad right-of-way. KATO Unitrack is one of the greatest innovations in model railroading, and I hope you find this guide helpful in painting your own track. Painting turnouts has its own series of troubleshooting and fixes, so I'll cover that in a future video. Keep them rolling, and thanks for watching.